stitching on linen looks beautiful, but does come with the added challenge of occasional slubs. So today I want to chat about how you might deal with these, and also little tufts that you may get, like this one here. Hi there Stitchy friends, I'm Kat from Catkin and Lily, bringing you all the best tips, tricks and tutorials so you can learn more about all things stitchy, grow your stitching skills and get the most joy from your stitching. Now this is a long dog sampler pattern called the Fisher King that I recently started. And after stitching for a while, I noticed a little tuft, which has now disappeared, but don't worry, we'll get in and look at it closer later. I noticed this little tuft just sticking out of the front of the fabric. Now, I'm using linen for this project, which is a natural fibre, so there will be some irregularities, and that's just something you have to accept when stitching on linen. The thing you'll find most often is that the thread thicknesses can vary, so you get slightly thinner and thicker threads. So you'll see with this one just here, you've got a slightly thicker thread here, and then just below here, you've got a very, very skinny thread. Now, where the thread is just slightly thicker in areas, you're not going to be able to do anything to fix that. And if you find that hard to work with, then linen might not be the best fabric for you. But you can also get what we call slubs, where a part of the thread gets really thick, such as these bits you can see just here. And this is usually due to some extra loose fibre getting caught up in the threads at certain points during the spinning or weaving process. Slubs may also occur if a knot forms in the fibre as it's spun or woven. If you have a slub where there's some extra loose fibre, and it's so big that you think it might actually interfere with your stitching, then you might be able to remove some of that and make it look a little neater if you want to. It's also fine just to leave it as is if it doesn't bother you or you don't want to fiddle with it. Just be very cautious, because if the slub's due to a knot in the fibre, or the extra fibre is very entangled with the threads of the fabric, then trying to remove it could result in breaking the threads of the fabric and leaving you with a hole, which I personally think is worse than the slub. If you want to deal with slubs, then you can try very cautiously picking at the top of the slub with a pin, and then using tweezers to try and pull away the excess fluff. And even just that little bit, that has actually made that a little bit better. I could go a bit harder on that, but that's just removed the worst of that slub. That's that little fluffy bit. And I could just now work over that. Here's another slub, and again it's a fairly small one, so I could even leave this and try to stitch over it, but also I could try to remove a little of the bulk to make it easier. I'm going to use the pin to gently tease at the top of the slub to loosen the excess fibre so that I can grab it with the tweezers. As you do this, you really want to avoid digging in too hard to the fabric, because you don't want to catch and pull the threads that make up the actual weave of the fabric. Whether you want to tackle slubs and remove them really comes down to how confident you're feeling, how you feel about the risk-reward balance. I would be more wary of doing this on a project I've already started stitching, but I might tackle a few large slubs before stitching if I felt it would be helpful to remove them. Even then, you do have to be careful, because you run the risk of making a hole in your fabric and rendering that part of the fabric unusable, which might in turn make that entire piece no good for what you intended it for. I also think it's worth trying out your slub removal technique a few times on slubs at the edges of a piece of linen, just to see how you get on before tackling ones in the middle of the fabric. You also need to know when to stop, because I could potentially go a little harder on this, but I risk damaging the fabric weave and making a hole in the fabric. And what I've done here is good enough. Here's a great example of a slub that would be pretty hard to stitch over, because it's quite chunky and it's obscuring the holes of the fabric, so you wouldn't even know where to put your needle to make your stitches. Again, I'm going to gently pick at the top of this slub with my pin, And you can see how I've then loosened it and fluffed it up slightly to give me something to grab hold of with my tweezers. Sometimes I'll switch from a picking motion to a kind of scraping motion with the pin to try to loosen it further, again without digging that pin into the fabric. You may need to go back and forth between the pin and the tweezers a few times to loosen a little and then pull that fluff away. Now this is looking a lot better. But sometimes you'll find it helpful to flip the fabric over, as you may find some excess fibre on both sides of the fabric. And then you can grab the loose fibre on the back side as well and remove it. This little tuft here on the back is feeling quite stubborn, so I don't want to pull it any harder just yet in case it's integral to the weave of the fabric. Let's go back and forth between the two sides of the fabric and tease each side out a little more, and then I think I can get that excess off the back as well. So I've been able to remove most of that big lump of excess thread, and I can now see the individual holes of the fabric weave, so that's a huge improvement. And I could now stitch over this no problem. So I found another very long slub here that I've had a little pick at to see if I can make it a bit better. It probably is a little bit better. I'll put in a before and after photo so you can see, and see also the amount of fluff that came off of it. Now back to my little tuft that's just here, which might be where a slub or part of a slub has worked its way loose. It could also be where I've caught the fabric while I was stitching, because I do stitch in hand and this is 40 count linen, which is very delicate. That also means that I need to be very, very careful with dealing with any slubs because the thread count is so high. Those threads are very delicate. So, how to deal with this, because I don't yet know if this will be in a stitched area or a blank area, but I don't really want to try and stitch over it, and I don't want it visible if it ends up in an unstitched area. Unlike a slub, I don't really want a little tufty bit sticking out. One thing I will never do with slubs or tufts is to try to cut them with scissors. It's possible that they may still be integral to the weave of the fabric. So cutting out a slub or a tuft could allow a thread or threads to unravel and pull out, leaving a hole in your fabric. I also risk cutting other fabric threads while trying to cut the tuft off or deal with the slub. I've given this a little bit of a gentle tug and it does seem quite well attached. Fortunately, there's a very simple fix for this little tuft. And I just need this. It's a short piece of thread, a single strand that I've folded in half and threaded through my needle. So I've got the two cut ends here and I've got a loop at this end. Now don't make it too short, as it will just make the process fiddlier than it needs to be. But you don't need very long. This is about 30 centimetres of a single strand folded in half, so I've got about 15 centimetres here. And I'm going to take a close look at where that tuft is and find a hole that's closest to it. I think this one will do. And I'm going to push my needle through the closest hole to where that tuft seems to be coming out of the fabric. And then I'm going to pull that through on this side. I can just leave it there. Let's pull it through until, there we go, I've got a loop on this side. And then going to place the loop over the tuft, and then let's put my hand up from underneath here. I've grabbed my thread and I'm going to start pulling it through, and I'm going to make sure my tuft is in that loop and pull it all the way through to the back, and that's it, it's gone. Obviously my thread's just come out the back. The tuft is now, I probably can't even find where it is, somewhere on the back here, but no tuft on the front. And that's it. I can just leave it like that. If I do end up stitching over that area and that tuft is still there on the back somewhere, I will need to be mindful of that and make sure I don't accidentally pull it back to the front. In fact, you might want to leave dealing with tufts until you're much closer to them with your stitching so that you don't forget about them. And I found another little tuft just here, you can see. So we're going to do the thread loop again, just so I can show you a second time round. So again, I'm going to look for a hole close to where that is, exactly where it is, push that needle through, pull it down. Now I'm going to try and settle that loop. This is the bit I know is very hard to see, but I've made it so that hopefully you can just see there, this little tuft is being circled by my loop, so that when I pull this from the back, it's grabbed hold of that little tuft and popped it through to the back. And let's see if we can see it on the back this time. Yeah, there it is. Whether you guys can see it or not, I don't know, but there is just a little tuft. There it is. Now, obviously I haven't been stitching on this fabric, so the front or back is kind of a moot point at this point, but this would be what you would do if that tuft was on what is actually the front of your fabric that you are stitching on. If you're thinking that you've seen me use this scrap thread loop trick a number of times now, then yes, you have, because it's really handy and one of my favourite techniques. I've previously shown how to use it to deal with tiny thread ends that need running in, or to eke out that one last stitch. So if you'd like to see either of those, then check out the links in the description. And next time you come across one of those little tufts, you'll know exactly how to deal with it quickly and easily and carry on stitching as if nothing had happened. If you enjoyed this video, then please do give it a like and make sure to subscribe to my channel for more stitchy tips and tutorials, which will also ensure they can reach and help more cross stitchers. Thank you so much for watching, happy stitching, and bye for now.